Welcome to At Your Library. I'm your host, Kathleen Clifford. Today we're going to talk about the ongoing opioid crisis in southeastern Connecticut. Joining us today is Groton Town Police Chief L.J. Fizzaro. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good morning.
We're going to jump right in on this because this is in the news every day. This is our headlines. These are our children and our loved ones. And so tell us, how bad is the opioid crisis in Connecticut and specifically in Groton?
Well, I'd like to tell you it's gotten better. Unfortunately, that's not really the case. The problem continues, and it isn't unique to our community. It's a nationwide problem. The issue persists. There is an ongoing demand for opioids, and addiction is really a problem in our community, and it has cascading effects in other areas where people that are suffering from addiction end up getting involved in other crimes and other problems, and it has had a pretty substantial impact here in Groton and our surrounding communities. So the problem is there, and many different groups, including police and public health and community activists, have really gotten involved and try to change the tide of this problem. And I'm happy to report that that's made an impact, but it does still exist. Well,
for our public, what would you describe an opioid as?
Well, opioids aren't new. They've been around for thousands of years. Really, in the Far East, thousands of years ago is where the poppy plant was produced. Right. There's really two kinds of opioids. One is a synthetic opioid, which is manufactured. A lot of it's used in healthcare, but there's the good old-fashioned heroin and opioid derivatives from the poppy plant. What we see now is not just a heroin problem. It's not confined to just heroin. Heroin is an opioid, but things like fentanyl, Oxycontin, morphine. There's other substances out there that are used for medicinal purposes, and that's where part of this problem has come from as well. It's not just the heroin, but it's some of the prescription medications that people try to get their hands on and become addicted to.
So people can innocently have an injury, go to their doctors, and get prescribed an opioid.
Sure.
So how does that transition into becoming a major problem?
Well, it does affect the receptors in the brain.
Okay.
And really what happens is, someone may go in for surgery or have some kind of medical procedure done, and as a result, they're prescribed opioids, whether it's Oxycontin, fentanyl, other substances. But what ends up happening is if they're not managed well and they don't use it according to the guidelines that doctors prescribe, one can become addicted to it and continue needing that for pain management, but also become addicted because it does affect some of the pleasure zones of the brain, and an increased dependency results.
So we hear a lot about heroin. We think heroin, street drug, heroin, won't even say all the negative things we think. But an opioid addict can be someone that is on painkillers, on heroin. So what's the real difference that the public should know about?
Well, the problem that we're dealing with today is not really the problem we dealt with years ago. I think people have a misconception that individuals addicted to some type of opioid or have a drug dependency problem are those people that are on the fringes of society. That's not the case. Like you pointed out, many people develop this dependency as a result of some very reasonable activities. They went to a doctor because of an issue, they had surgery, and they're prescribed this opioid. So they're part of our society. They're people that we know. They're not the fringe members that maybe years ago were associated with heroin and morphine addiction. They're really people that we see every day, and in many cases they're members of our own family, our own community, people that are close to us. So it's the difference is, heroin as it's derived is really an illegal substance. It's something that someone has manufactured for the express intent of selling. But the big problem we're seeing now is with the stuff you hear in the news, which is the fentanyl, the carfentanil, the Oxycontin, prescription medications that really have, in some cases, have fallen into the wrong hands and become valuable to people that would deal those drugs on the street.
So I'm not too familiar with fentanyl and carfentanil. Can you describe a little bit what those are?
They're more potent derivatives of the opioid product. They're in the case of fentanyl, it's about 100 times more potent than than heroin itself, and carfentanil is even more potent than that. So a tiny little bit of those substances is very potent, and they're, again, synthetic, so they've been enhanced. They're really used for medicinal purposes and for very legitimate reasons, for pain management, for people recovering from surgeries and things of that nature. Some of them, I mean, carfentanil, because it's so potent, is used to tranquilize animals, large
Really?
animals, horses, and that's where people try to get their hands on that. And one of the big demands in this this whole opioid problem is that when people first realize they use one of these substances for the first time, they get a high out of it. It does hit those pleasure zones. And the term chasing the dragon is used, where they try to replicate that in the future. So in many cases where someone realizes that first euphoric experience with using some of these substances, they try to replicate that, and they never really can. So they go after the more potent substances that are out there. And in many cases, those are the more toxic substances. Sometimes they're mixed with other substances which make them, in many cases, lethal.
So a lot of times it'll start as a medicinal use, it'll turn into the wrong hands, and then it'll be tampered with or enhanced or...
Yeah, in some cases that is what happens. It starts as a medicinal, very legitimate reasons. I remember talking to someone about 2 years ago when this really started becoming an epidemic. And it was an individual who was in the military, did some great service overseas, had suffered an injury, ended up going and being treated. Mm-hmm. And when he was discharged, ended up getting a bunch of Oxycontins, opioids, to use. And when that ran out, he still had the problem, and it resulted in that person going after illegal substances.
How often is that crossover? How often do you see people that are legal that go to an illegal?
It happens quite frequently because now their body is depending on this and they need it. And in many cases, we substitute legal stuff for illegal stuff. And here's what I mean by that. A person may develop a dependency. Maybe a person has been incarcerated in the prison system, or they're trying to get off of this stuff. And under medical care, they're given stuff like Suboxone, which is really another type of opioid that replaces the more potent one to try and wean them off of it. But the dependency exists until until medical people can get them off of all of those derivatives.
So it really is important if you're to have assistance when you're withdrawing, when you're getting off of these things.
Absolutely.
To keep from rebounding.
Absolutely. And that's where the medical field is extremely important. I mean, in police work, we don't have that level of experience. We do deal with people. We try to direct those that we can to seek assistance, and we have some avenues that we can pursue and that we point them to, and particularly in Groton, where we have a Community Speaks Out and some other organizations that we can get them help. But it needs to be under the doctor's care.
Okay.
They really need to have some medical partners to help them through this process.
Because it is really tough.
Absolutely.
So how often do you see the other case? How often does the Groton Town Police respond to overdoses?
Well, last year we had the ones that were reported to us. Now, we have to assume that there's many that aren't reported to us, but we responded to about 14 or so overdoses, 7 of which resulted in death.
And this is in 2017?
That's right. That's right.
And just in Groton?
Just in Groton.
Now we are starting to hear more about Narcan. Mm-hmm. How does that work?
Narcan really is an agent that reverses the effects of the overdose. We do have, our officers do have Narcan. In fact, I brought some with us today.
Okay.
What it does is it helps counteract what the person's going through. It is a life-saving tool. And our officers have used it in the field, do have access to it, as do other entities, the fire departments, EMS, they also have access to it. But in some cases where our officers are the first there and they can administer this, it is a life-saving drug, and it gets them to medical care, to the hospital to seek further assistance.
How fast, or I guess how long do you have that the Narcan is effective? Like, how immediately do you have to be on scene? It
works pretty fast, and I mean, when they're going through their medical crisis, when they're that's when it has to be administered as soon as possible. Then it has the best effect, and it can be very dramatic, where it reverses course. Someone does regain consciousness. It is a critically important tool. We're fortunate because the ones that we have in the department have been donated from a Community Speaks Out, but really from a lot of them from Lawrence Memorial Hospital, which is where this one came from, and this is one that was provided to our officers, and we along with other police departments in the area did get many doses of this, so our officers have been trained, they know how to use it, and it's a great tool. There is a downside to this too, I might point out, and the downside is this. I told you that people start to chase the dragon. They want to get that high again. In many cases, some of the people that are dealing these drugs have this available to them as well. So when people do overdose on heroin or an opioid, they have it available, and they're making it a bit of a commodity in the drug trade as well, so that if I sell you drugs, I can maybe sell you Narcan too, so that if something happens while you're using the drugs, we can bring you back.
Really? So you're telling me that Narcan is not only available to the public, drug dealers are now utilizing this as yet another tool?
Some people do. They recognize the fact that people do overdose and people have died from this. And we get back to the law enforcement aspect of it. In our organization and law enforcement agencies as a whole are really not so much after those people that are addicted and suffering from the addiction problem of opioids. We really want to get to the people that are making this their illegal business, the ones that are selling the stuff, the ones that maybe don't use it but are pushing it out to other people. And in this community, we've seen that a lot. In we've stood up a task force that has collaborated with other partners in southeastern Connecticut, the Regional Community Enhancement Task Force, where we've taken some of our officers, our detectives and investigators, and worked with other organizations at the local, state, and federal level to target the people that are selling this stuff, that are selling the opioids. So in some cases, yeah, this is available. This is available to community, and sometimes very reasonably available. What I mean by that is people that have family members that may be suffering from addiction, they can get their hands on this, and that's important. But on the other hand, people that use it so they can continue this addiction and continue their business practices of selling this stuff to people, that's where there's a problem as well.
Absolutely. This is just processing this all is just so intense. I read the paper, I see what's happening in the public and the media, and I would like to say that every time we see that the Groton Town Police is successful in getting somebody off the streets, I'd like to say thank you for that, because this is something. And so the community is embracing change, they're embracing education, they're embracing help. Do you work with you talked about Community Speaks, is there any other places that you work with the police, and what's the goal for kind of nonprofits to come in and help, and what do you see their role as?
Yeah, we work with a bunch of different organizations. I sit on a work group with some other chiefs here in Connecticut about the opioid problem. There's a subset of the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association that we set up where 3 or 4 chiefs sit on it to try and steer how we do business in a better way to react to this problem. And the way we like to look at it is it's not a single faceted approach, meaning traditional police work is you identify crime, you go out and you make arrests, you affect crime, you try and change the atmosphere. Well, we're really looking at things differently because we've partnered with some organizations, not just here in Groton, but across the country, where we've realized, no matter how many people we arrest, the problem still exists. We need to look at the root cause of it and try and do something from our standpoint to affect that, and that's where a group like a Community Speaks Out comes in. Back in 2015, shortly after I became chief, several of us went up to Massachusetts to look at some programs that were happening in the Gloucester area as far as police-assisted recovery.
Yes, I've read about that.
And it's been very effective, where our officers, particularly our narcotics enforcement officers who are going out there and they're making arrests of people that are dealing drugs or committing other crimes to continue their drug trade, we've tried to steer some of those people to help.
Okay.
But they've got to be ready for help. They've got to want help. And there's been a lot of success stories. Last week, myself and some of our narcotics investigators met with other town officials here at the the Town Hall Annex to discuss this problem. And I'm very proud of some of the work that they've done, not just because they're out there arresting people, because they've really helped people on our Facebook account, as well as notes and messages to some of our officers saying, hey, you arrested me, but you pointed me in the right direction. You got me the help that I needed. And it's through avenues like a Community Speaks Out and other organizations where we really don't have the capability to do that, but as long as we gave them the answers to who to go to help you, that's where we're really most proud of the success they've had.
Oh, that is just such positive news in such a negative topic. Thank you so much for being with us today. Is there anything else that we missed that you want to make sure that the community knows? No,
again, we talked about it a little bit, but it's a problem that affects so many different segments of society, and we have such a diverse community here in Groton, from the Thames River to Mystic, a whole bunch of different demographics, neighborhoods, people of various socioeconomic status. It's not unique to any of them. It spreads across the whole gamut of society. And the other part of this problem is, although the opioids and deaths and overdoses are certainly the tip of the problem, there's other problems that result. Increased crimes, people that are trying to fund their addiction or fund their criminal enterprise. They get into burglaries and larcenies, and we've had thefts from cars. And at one point we had a burglary spree happening in Noank, which were people that were, addicted to heroin. And in fact, there's some other problems that result from this, like human trafficking and prostitution. And if we can get at the root cause, and through the community's help and engagement, when they see something suspicious, they let us know about it, and they report those things. That's where we can direct our efforts. So it's a partnership with the community, trying to help people that are suffering from addiction, but also to stem the tide of all those cascading effects from this problem.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
When we come back after the break, we're going to be joined by Rebecca Spearer. She is coordinating programs here at the Groton Public Library to help educate our community. Please come back.
We'd do anything for kids. Yet 1 in 6 children in the U.S. struggle with hunger. Help end childhood hunger near you. Learn how at feedingamerica.org.
I'll be right back. Hi! You think you're probably sober?
Yeah.
But you're thinking about taking the back roads home, just in case. If you're probably sober, then why would you do that? Good choice.
Probably okay isn't okay. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend.
That's a full glass of wine. I'll be chatting you later.
Welcome back to At Your Library. I'm your host, Kathleen Clifford. We've been talking today about the opioid epidemic in Connecticut, and specifically southeastern Connecticut. And now joining us is library assistant Rebecca Spearer. Rebecca has decided that the library should do programming to help bridge to the community information that we need on the opioid epidemic. So joining us, thank you, Becca, for joining us here at Your Library. What I want to know is, tell us what the library is going to be doing for programming.
So the library will be presenting 4 programs. It's a series of programs in February in regards to the opioid epidemic. We'll be updating our book collection as well, so we have some more up-to-date information about the epidemic. And we do have a display currently that highlights local news regarding the crisis.
Okay. And this will be taking place in February?
In February, yep.
Okay. So the first program that we have, I see, is Dr. Sachs is coming on February 5th at 7 o'clock at the library. Can you tell us in detail what he's going to talk about?
So Dr. Sachs is Chairman Emeritus of Middlesex Hospital. He's got about 30 years of experience in emergency medicine, and he's going to talk to us about opioids and then how we can, stop the crisis or attempt to stop the crisis. He'll go into the causes of the epidemic, the role of prescribers and patients, and learn how to end the epidemic, or try to.
Okay. So that is on February 5th. Then we're going to go and show a film.
Yes, we are. We're going to be showing Requiem for a Dream. It's directed by Darren Aronofsky. I can't really pronounce his name. And it will be shown at 6:30 on February 8th, which is a Thursday night. The film is rated R for intense depiction of drug addiction, strong language, some violence, and some graphic sexuality. So that is something to be aware about. Again, the movie is very intense, so just so you're aware. This movie is incredibly powerful and eye-opening. It could really make people rethink what they think they know about addiction. So I do recommend it to anyone who is willing to and wants to gain perspective on the epidemic.
Excellent. It sounds like it would be a good opportunity for people to become a little more educated, and unfortunately, and hopefully not, they won't see people that they know or, like that in there. But it's always good to have educational tools out there for our public to have. And I know on February 15th, this is really incredible that you put this panel together. Tell us about the panel that will be coming in and who will be on it.
Okay, so we will have Chief Fusaro joining us for the panel, and he will be bringing one of his narcotics enforcement officers with him. Joe Dela Cruz, who is our state representative, will be on board, and he's part of Community Speaks Out. So he's very for trying to find resources for recovering addicts. Carolyn Wilson from GASP will be joining us. She'll be talking about prevention and education. And a member of the community in recovery will hopefully be joining us so we can gain some perspective on what it's like to go through addiction.
And come out positive on the other side.
Yes, exactly.
That sounds like an incredible panel, and as we talked to the chief earlier, he is such a wealth of information, and he's going to bring with him, you said, somebody that's right on the field working against narcotics. I think that's great. And the fact that the police, together with Community Speaks, which not everybody knows is a huge nonprofit outreach here in southeastern Connecticut, working together is such a win-win for this situation. So, and that, when is that again?
That is February 15th at 7 p.m.
February 15th. So that's a great one to come to also. And then I know one thing that we talked about with the chief was he talked about Narcan and how it can be a powerful tool to help people. And are you going to be doing something with Narcan or Narcan education as part of the program?
We'll be having a Narcan training. It's presented by Perception Programs. They're out of Willimantic. They're a recovery center and outreach center, so they work to help people get out of addiction. They'll be coming on the 22nd of February at 6 p.m. and they will tell us, how to use Narcan, how to recognize an overdose, and how to respond to the overdose, as well as where to get Narcan if you do need it.
And you can't, or for whatever reason, you can't get the police involved, or
right. If someone is in
or
recovery, you might want to have it on hand, or just for that reason mostly. Yes,
it's really great to have that education. Can I ask what prompted you to want to do a program here at the library?
So as an EMT, I'm out in the field. I've seen a lot of overdoses, and I've only been an EMT for about a year, and not even a year and a half now. So it's something that is a huge problem in our communities, and not just our communities, but the whole nation. It's a problem in every zip code, so it's very important for us to focus on that and try to have the community work together to make it better.
Absolutely, and I am so happy that the library can sponsor this, and I think it's really important to utilize every single tool, our people, our resources, our places, and work together to help solve and hopefully find an end to this horrible program. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been At Your Library. I'm your host, Kathleen Clifford. Thanks for checking in.